Thanks, Becca. I really appreciate all of the effort you've done to set this up today. So hi, everyone. We want to welcome you on behalf of WVU TAB. The purpose of, well, I should back up and introduce myself. My name is Katie C. I'm the Brownfields Redevelopment Specialist here with WVU TAB. And I'm going to let Carrie, our director, introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Carrie Staten. I'm the director of WVU TAB, and I have been at the center since 2011. I'm excited to talk with y'all today.
Thanks, Carrie. So the purpose of today's grant, it falls within our new grant applicant series. So it's a program we've put together in the hopes of educating folks who may not be so familiar with the grant process, or for those who maybe it's been a while and you need a refresher. And so today the goal is to prepare you for an EPA grant as far in advance as possible. By the time you may find out about grants or decide to apply for one, late summer or early fall, it may be too late for some of the timing. So we hope that we can better equip you with that decision. So yes, you can see on the slide here on your screen, you can see Carrie, myself, and Becca. We are the ones leading the webinar today, but we did have some assistance from our other folks on staff as well. So you do see our email there as well. You can contact us at any time if you have any questions, but this information will also be available later. And why are you hearing from us here at WVU TAB? Well, the reason is we are the EPA Region 3 provider for technical assistance to brownfields. So within that role, part of our goal and mission here is to educate you about resources, and brownfield education is one of those ways to do it. So this actually kind of falls within education and then also resource identification. So that's why we are bringing this here to you. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Katie. All right, so just to make sure we're all grounded in the same space, quick definition of a brownfield. The official EPA definition is a real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. What does that mean really? Traditionally, what we think of are old industrial sites that are no longer active. So in Region 3, times that looks like old pottery, glass factories, steel manufacturing, abandoned mine lands, things like that. It can also include smaller kinds of sites like dry cleaners and gas stations. But essentially anything where there is any potential or suspicion that there might be contamination from a previous use and that is hindering its redevelopment classifies it as a brownfield. Next slide. So why are brownfields bad or challenging communities? Very obviously, they're eyesores. An old dilapidated factory in the middle of your town doesn't look great. It is a clear degradation of the environment itself. If there's contamination, that's harming the soil. It could be harming the vegetation, the wildlife, etc. There may be safety liabilities if it's not secure and people may be able to get onto it. Then they could be harmed by the environmental contaminants or potentially just the physical hazards of a dilapidated site. There are additionally, along the same lines, the health hazards. It decreases the property value not only of the site itself, but also the sites around it. And that can cause an economic ripple effect. So if there's one kind of gnarly site in your community that's bringing down your property values, it also doesn't make it very attractive for other businesses to either improve their properties or to locate there. So that continues to have this ripple effect on the economy. And there's some indication that all of these things can lead to an increase in crime. Neighborhoods with more blighted properties may have a higher incidence of crime. Next slide. But we're all here because we see the benefits of brownfields and we see those old industrial legacy sites as opportunities. And so what are those opportunities? They're most side of challenges that we talked about. There's an opportunity to turn those health and safety liabilities into community assets. and in doing so, creating new jobs, local jobs that are right in a community. Traditionally and historically, industrial centers were built in the centers of town or centrally located, with communities springing up around them where the workers worked or workers lived, so that they were rare. So it creates it's an infill development, which reduces sprawl. As you increase the property value of the target site, you're also increasing the property value of the properties around you, including not only the adjacent properties, but even going out a mile radius in that area. You're eliminating that eyesore, enhancing the economic and tax-based development. So an idle site is probably generating very much tax income for the local municipality or county or state. And as you redevelop that and get active businesses in, you may increase the tax base. It, as I said, reduces sprawl by focusing on infill development. So supporting sustainable use of land and preserving the green space that is in other parts of the community. And there is a link between the economic vitality of a community with preserving the environment and addressing those environmental issues. Next slide. So why should you apply for a Brownfield grant from the EPA? While there are all of these great opportunities, Brownfield site, it can get very expensive very quickly, especially when you have a very large site or there's a large amount of contamination. EPA provides financial support for all parts of the Brownfield redevelopment process, starting from inventory where your sites are, assessing those sites to figure out what the actual contamination is, so you're not just working on perception, cleaning up that site and planning for its redevelopment and productive reuse, whether that's economically productive in the creation of a new business at the site, or in creation of housing at a site, or even a green space reuse or recreational development. It also provides opportunities for the remediation that might not otherwise be available to you, by reducing the liability concerns, which can open up avenues for redevelopment partnerships. So there may be some public-private partnership strategies or ways that you can redevelop a site, and by doing that, you open up the opportunity for EPA grants. And often in some of the states in Region 3, but not all, there are other resources that can help redevelop and assess sites, but not every state has that, and not every community those other funds. And so EPA provides an opportunity for communities and nonprofits and other redevelopment organizations across the Mid-Atlantic to start to do something about their brownfield sites. Next slide. All right. So what are the funding needs? I said that it can get expensive. What is it? What makes it so expensive? Well, as you can see, there are a lot of different angles and different aspects of a brownfield redevelopment project that require money. So site acquisition, acquiring the site, purchasing the site can have some costs. Doing your due diligence and your both legal and environmental due diligence as part of that acquisition process. So that might include environmental assessments, which we talked about a little bit, land transfers, so paying for the property, your closing costs, attorney fees, all of that sort of. Site planning and preparation is expensive. Remediation, of course, so you have to pay to get the contaminants dealt with. Planning your site engineering. How are you going to grade the site? How do you, for whatever the reuse is going to be, and how do you plan for that? Infrastructure improvements. So another benefit of redeveloping brownfields that I didn't talk about too much earlier is a lot of times, because these sites already had an industrial reuse, for example, they have infrastructure existing there. It may need to be upgraded, but you're not starting from scratch like you would be in a green field or a completely undeveloped space. So you may have some infrastructure improvement costs. There is the site development, so construction of buildings, or perhaps just the rehabilitation of buildings if you're leaving them in place. And then the business development, creating the financing for businesses that are going to occupy those sites. So these are all the costs that from A to Z. When you're doing a brownfield redevelopment project, EPA does not pay for all of these, however, but on the next slide, we'll talk about what they do cover. So these things in red, this is the same list, but these things in red are items that EPA grants could cover. So environmental assessments is a big part of what EPA funding can be used for site planning and feasibility studies. So not just planning for the physical site, but also doing market studies, feasibility studies to see what's possible, what's the market going to bear on that site if you don't already have a clearly defined reuse in mind. The remediation is a huge part of what EPA funding will pay for, and something that from a public dollar perspective, EPA is probably the largest funder of that. And then that might also include the rehabilitation of physical structures, not just the soil. And then these other items, we'll talk a little bit later about other sources of funding for brownfield projects. But those are important. These are important costs, but they are not eligible for EPA funding. Oh, and site engineering has an asterisk. So site engineering might be eligible for EPA funding if it's part of a remediation plan, right? So a good example would be if you know what your reuse is going to be, and if you're doing a cleanup grant, you have written a beautiful grant and you've told them what your cleanup reuse is going to be, or your site reuse is going to be. And so as you're doing that remediation, maybe you're bringing in clean soil. When you bring it in, you can be replacing the soil and grading the site, for example, in a way that prepares it for reuse. So if you're just doing the site engineering and it's not part of the remedy, it wouldn't be eligible, but it may be that you're doing it in a smart way. And so it does end up being covered by EPA funding. And I think I'm handing it back to Katie.
Yes. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, so one thing we want to let you know about is what are the types of funding that is available. So first, again, the purpose of today's PowerPoint, it leads with EPA Brownfield grants, and the EPA kind of breaks those down with a quick acronym so that they call it the MARC grants, which would be Multipurpose Assessment, Revolving Loan Fund, Cleanup, and Job Training. So we will talk about those a bit more later. And then also some funding that's available comes under the headline of EPA Technical Assistance. That includes Targeted Brownfields Assessment, or TBA, not to be confused with TAB, which is us. It's a lot to keep up with. And then also technical assistance, and that includes regionally directed and land revitalization. Next slide. So we want to prepare you and give you an idea of the difference between the two just briefly, so that you can, if you're already considering something, we want to be able to prepare you for a path that you may be able to go down had you not considered it. So which option may be best for you? Well, when it comes to brownfield grants, you are dealing with a hard application deadline, and it needs to be prepared in advance. So these grant guidelines are released in the early fall of each year traditionally, and then they also come due in late fall. So again, that is a hard deadline, and there's a lot of work certainly that goes into preparing that application. They are nationally competitive. Applicant is responsible for the grant oversight. So if you apply for the grant, you are awarded the grant, you as the applicant are responsible for the grant from start to finish. And that includes setting up the work plan and choosing who is going to do the services for you. So it's choosing that qualified environmental professional who will do the assessment and any planning documents. So if you're going to do some visioning and feasibility studies, you are responsible for selecting someone who can assist you with that. Again, we are always here to help you with that. And then again, you are responsible for carrying the grant through to the end and preparing the reports along the process, and ultimately closing the grant up at the end. And then assessment grants are usually for multiple sites. So they have had in the past before site-specific, individual site-specific assessment grants, but that can be a lot of work, and especially if you don't have a lot of capacity. Typically, the community-wide assessment grants look at a lot of sites so that it can really set you up for bigger planning options in the future. So we move over to EPA technical assistance. It's kind of a comparing information as we did on the left side of your screen for grants. Sites are selected locally on a rolling basis. So whereas with grants, it's a hard deadline that comes due in the fall, when it comes to technical assistance, you work with your region. And again, those applications come due, those applications actually don't have a hard and fast deadline. Again, they are regionally focused as opposed to nationally competitive. for the most part, again, regionally focused. And then the process is facilitated by the EPA. So that is a nice benefit to the technical assistance. Again, where I discussed all the points that the applicant is responsible for should you be awarded a grant. The EPA with their consultant, they are the ones who do the heavy lifting, but also it could help establish a familiarity with the EPA process. So sometimes technical assistance is a good start to prepare you if in the future you want to apply for a full grant. And then generally they are targeted at one site or some contiguous sites. So again, if you are just starting out or you really can only identify one site that you really want to assess at the time, the technical assistance program would be a good option there. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the targeted brownfields assessment. Again, it can assist other efforts under the brownfields program to initiate the cleanup and redevelopment of brownfield sites. So again, just as I mentioned, as it could kind of be almost a springboard, if you will. So if you, again, if you're just uncertain or it's just one small site that you want to assess and you may not have the capacity, it's a great start for that. Gets your feet wet, gets you familiar with the EPA program, and it also gets the EPA familiar with you. And so also it could be that if you do the assessment of the site, it may be that, again, you want to apply for an EPA cleanup grant in the future, or you want to come back later and consider a full EPA assessment grant. The TBA program does help states, tribes, and municipalities. They are considered a grant of services, and they are conducted by the consultants who are already under contract with the EPA. Again, you don't have to select the consultant. You are working with someone that they already have and have vetted through the process. And services include phase 1 and 2 site assessments, cleanup options and cost estimates, and also community outreach. So it is not the cleanup itself, but it's trying to give you a sense of what you may be able to expect in terms of just what is the extent of the assessments that were found on the site. It is not for planning purposes. It is for assessment, and services generally on average are from $50,000 to $100,000. Again, when it comes to TBA, it's really considered assessment. The EPA is not permitted to do planning work under this program. Next slide, please. Technical assistance. While TBA is geared for the assessment piece, technical assistance and that is geared for planning and reuse. So this is a good tool when it comes to completing projects that need that extra effort when it comes to financial planning. So it does help communities identify practical, safe site reuse options and approaches that support the local goals through access to site planning, design, and financial experts. So again, it's a great resource to have that's available to you. Again, especially if capacity is a concern or it's a small site, these are great opportunities. It is designed specifically to help the community navigate their brownfield reuse goals. It does fill in some gaps in site planning that are not often funded locally, because it may be that if a community receives some funding for the assessment grant and then you need some other assistance to financially be able to cover these steps to get you to a cleanup process, this would be a great tool for that. It does give you access to technical experts who are familiar with the innovative approaches, as it says there. Again, you just may not be familiar with it, but, going through this program will give you the opportunity to have folks at your disposal who are, and it's a great learning opportunity. And then it is, again, just as I've already mentioned, a good opportunity that could lead to cleanup options. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So really, again, we really wanted to point out the technical assistance option because it's a great option available to you. So if you've come to this webinar and you wanted to learn more about grants, obviously we hope this is fulfilling that for you. But if you're learning through this, that this may be a good option for you, please contact us. We'd be happy to talk to you and help you coordinate learning more about it through the Region 3 coordinator, the gentleman in charge of the program. And again, let you know about that those options. Also do want to point out that while typically EPA grants require a match, with the exception of this past year due to the extra funding, the technical assistance does not require a match. So that's certainly a nice perk as well. All right, next slide. So if you've decided that a grant is the best option for you, or just one you want to learn a little bit more about, we're going to move on to some more information. So here's just an overview we want to give you about the EPA grant application process. Again, we really want to focus with allowing you to plan ahead and be able to understand which pieces you should be working on now, or get an understanding of when you should start to prepare for that in order to help you be successful for your application in the fall. Okay, so one of the very first things you need to do is assemble your brownfield redevelopment team. So that, it certainly varies by site, but you will always have the property owner, you'll have a developer, investors, potential buyer, you may be ready for that. It could involve tenants, if it's going to have multiple units within it, and it's not just a single unit redevelopment. I'm stumbling on my words. Stakeholders, public, and that can include your local and regional government, community groups, nonprofit, and then also private stakeholders, and that could include lenders, insurers, and investors. Some other members that you will have will include the EPA and your qualified environmental professional. That's the QEP there, and of course WVU TAB. I did touch on briefly when talking about the technical assistance, the fact that can bring in some subject matter experts that may have some innovative techniques that you may not be aware of. And so that certainly applies if you if you're applying for a grant as well. I know we are speaking with some folks right now, and so we here at TAB, or the team we are trying to assemble for the community we're speaking with, are those who are familiar with acid mine drainage, because I am not a scientist, and also coal reuse, coal piles. So, you've got that located on the site, and you're thinking, what are we to do with the remnants that are left over? Well, we are working to try to help them put that information together. And so again, while that's not in my wheelhouse, it is something that this particular community will need to consider when moving forward in the best way possible for their project. Next slide. Okay, inventories, another first, one of the, not another first step, but a step that should happen early on in the process is knowing just how many sites you have. So brownfields they really are in every community. I know that it may not seem like it, and it may not seem like an obvious one, but it generally comes down to how big is it, and then how many are there. It may be that you really only have one site, but that site could be pretty complex. It could be, as Carrie mentioned earlier, a former glass or pottery site. It could simply be an old school building that was built in the time when they used asbestos and lead-based paint. So the inventory process again helps you start to understand what they are. And again, this needs to happen earlier in the process, and you cannot begin to redevelop without knowing the inventory. And we want to point out that the inventory is a list. So it's not something we want you to feel intimidated about, and it's something that we can absolutely assist you with here at TAB. Again, it is no cost to you, but we are happy to help you put together your community team to understand going through the process of what is a brownfield, and again, putting them on your list and start to prioritize which ones are the most obvious and which ones may need to be addressed first. By doing this, by creating your list, it allows you to plan. Again, are you dealing with one site, or are you dealing with multiple sites that may want to get you to think about, should you start to look for
applying for a community-wide assessment grant, and then that could lead to a cleanup grant, right, for the site that may be the site or sites that may be the most prominent to come out of that assessment grant. But again, you have to start with your list so that you know what you're working with. And again, we don't want you to be intimidated because it really is a list, and that list can change over time. You know, it could change as the property owner demolishes it. And hopefully they've gone through the proper steps with that. And you could also add to it if there's one you just weren't quite aware of, because certainly it does need to be an abandoned site. And now I'm going to hand it over to Carrie. Thanks, Katie. So we're doing this series now, even though there's not an open EPA grant solicitation, because there are things that you can start to think about, both from the programmatic side, what kind of sites you want to look at, do you have a site already, and also some administrative things that can sometimes take longer than you might think. And so it's a good idea to get them started as early as possible so that you don't run into a snag down the line because of some paperwork or technicality. And so where do you even start? Next slide. Before you can even apply for an EPA grant, you have to complete several steps. So the first thing that you have to do as an organization is register with sam.gov. And after you've registered with sam.gov, you'll be able to connect that with your grants.gov account, which is where all EPA grants are accepted. There are some very, very narrow exceptions and times when EPA will accept grant proposals not through grants.gov, and it's decided on a case-by-case basis. So you should assume and plan to apply through grants.gov always. And then if you're doing a cleanup grant or a multi-purpose grant, you want to make sure that you're transferring the property transferred in time, and that when you're doing that property transfer, you're conducting what's called all appropriate inquiry on your site. If you're doing an assessment grant, or a revolving loan fund grant, you don't need to worry about, because you don't need to acquire the sites in order to do that. However, if you are acquiring a site for any reason, whether you're going to use an EPA grant or not, you should always do all appropriate inquiry. And we'll talk about that. Next slide. So SAM.gov is the system for award management. This is the system that the entire U.S. federal government uses for anyone who's doing business with them. You must register through sam.gov if you're going to do business, and if there's going to be money exchanged. There are different kinds of accounts that you might have on sam.gov. In order to apply for an EPA grant, you have to be registered to at least apply for grants. It is a free website. It's official and managed by the federal government. You use the sam.gov website to register your business or your organization or your municipality. Initially, it's also where you update or renew your entity registration, which does have to be done on an annual basis. And you can check the status of your own entity registration, or even other entity registration. So I have an account. I do not have an entity account because I'm part of a large university. My university has an account, but I have a personal account that allows me to search the status of entities as I'm assisting them to see what publicly available information is out there. That said, when you register, you are able to not be listed. So not everyone can find you, and that's a decision that you make internally. It is not an automatic registration. So it's not like registering for an Amazon account and you go set up your account and you instantly are able to go and spend all your money. You do have to wait. There are verifications that have to happen at the sam.gov organization. There are things that they have to verify when you submit your documents. So you should not put this off to last minute. This says it can take at least 2 weeks to complete. That's what they say. It usually takes longer than that. And months, it has been taking probably closer to 3 or 4 weeks if everything's all lined up, and that just has to do with their caseload. If you have ever applied for federal funding in the past, you might already have a sam.gov account and the required unique entity ID number. So you should check with folks in your organization, see if it's true, to make sure that it is up to date. Even a renewal or an update can take a little while, especially if there are things that need to be changed or if your account has been inactive for a while. So again, the main message of this is not to wait. The other thing to remember, if you're trying to figure out if you have this or not, if you're new to your organization, you don't know if they've ever applied for federal funding before because you were not a part of it. The kinds of folks who typically are in charge of this information at an organization might be your city clerk, your city manager, if you have a grant writer on staff. If you're a nonprofit organization, it might be your executive director or a member of your board, depending on sort of how your function is. But you want to make sure that you figure it out. And when you have people who are leaving, you want to make sure that you're changing that information as you go, because you can get stuck in this space where all the updates are going to an email that's no longer monitored or has been turned off. So these are important things to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that it is completely free to register at sam.gov. It is completely free to update your registration or renew your registration at sam.gov. There are some very sophisticated scams that will email you and offer to help you update this for the low price of $300. And you don't need to do that. Most of the time you can figure it out yourself, and it's pretty straightforward, especially on the renewal page. If you are having trouble, we are here to help you with this as well. And we are available for the very low price of $0. So definitely do not pay one of those. They look very official. So keep an eye out for that. Next slide. So once you're set up in sam.gov, you're going to need to get set up in grants.gov and make sure that you're connected appropriately with your organization's profile in grants.gov, which will be in turn tied to your sam.gov account. And you want to do this in advance in case there may be some trouble getting you connected to the right account. Again, if you've ever applied for federal grants before, you're probably already in grants.gov. I don't know the exact numbers, but fewer and fewer federal grants are being processed not through grants.gov, right? So it's been a transition, not a slow transition, but when it first was launched, not everything was going through there, but most federal agencies are running everything through grants.gov. So it is a good thing to get familiar with. And if you have applied before, you may already be familiar with it. It is also a clearinghouse for funding opportunities. You can search for funding opportunities on the grants.gov site. The EPA Brownfield program does a really great job of promoting and keeping the open and closed and expected or anticipated solicitation information on their website, which is a lot more user-friendly than grants.gov, but you also can always just search brownfields on grants.gov. You can search any number of things and you may find some other funding opportunities, but you do have to have an account considered for funding, and that your individual account does have to be tied to the right organization and have the right permissions. And again, this is something that we can help you with, and you should start in advance. Next slide. So the last thing you want to start thinking about early is all appropriate inquiry. This is part of your due diligence process when you are acquiring a property. You should consider and conduct all appropriate inquiry for any property transfer for commercial and industrial property, regardless of whether you may be pursuing EPA funding in the future. But it is required. You must have done your all appropriate inquiry and followed all of the current standards, which can be found on the EPA website. And I'll ask Katie, maybe if you can drop there's a great link to the EPA website where we pulled this information from for further reading on all the nuances of AAI. But generally speaking, you have to have it done within 180 days or about 6 months of the property transfer. These are tasks that are performed to see if there are potential environmental concerns on the property. It looks at things like past use. It might include a phase 1 environmental site assessment. It doesn't involve any testing. It's just usually a historical review, some interviews, and just looking at likely or potential contaminants of concern. This is an important step because it can give you some limited liability protection. It makes you eligible, Katie, she got that link in there. It makes you eligible for EPA funding, and it can help you get a better picture of what you're getting into. So it helps you know what might be available at a site. So when somebody comes to your city and says, I've got this great property and I just can't do anything with it, I'm going to give it to you for free, or you can have it for $10. That might be great. It might not, but definitely do your AAI before you get started. And if you don't have funding for this, this is a great candidate to ask for help from EPA through the targeted brownfield assessment program that Katie talked about earlier this morning. Next slide. So one more time, no matter what, do not take ownership of a property, especially a commercial or industrial property, if you have not done your all appropriate inquiry, and also especially if you're planning to apply for a cleanup or a multi-purpose grant. This is incredibly important. There is room on this eligibility criterion for properties that have been recently acquired. For properties that were acquired before 2002, when the brownfield legislation was first enacted, there are some different questions, and that's something that we can help you with. We're seeing that less and less as we get further and further away from the year 2002. But all appropriate inquiry and these standards didn't exactly exist in 2001, so they don't hold you to that for those properties. But again, that's something that we can help you navigate and can help connect with EPA project officers to navigate as well. Next slide. So how do you know which EPA grant is right for you? Katie's going to tell us a little bit more about each of these, but generally speaking, these are often collectively referred to as the MARC grants, which is just an acronym of the 4 typical types of grants from EPA that are focused on site area wide. A multi-purpose grant is a higher capacity, requires a higher capacity level than some of the other types of grants. This includes the ability to do some planning and cleanup under one grant award. And again, Katie's going to go into more detail about each of these in a few minutes. An assessment grant, primary eligible activities under an assessment grant are developing your brownfields inventory, doing environmental site assessments, and doing site planning activities, some of the similar activities to what Katie talked about in the technical assistance activities that are available, but this gives you a grant so that you can hire your own consultants and your own contractors to do that. And if you're doing multiple ones, it can be a better option than trying to do one at a time through EPA. Revolving loan funds are another grant type that requires a higher capacity. If you're a first-time applicant, I would not likely recommend that you go after a revolving loan fund. If you've managed other revolving loan funds before, that can be very beneficial, but this is a grant from EPA that allows you give out grants and loans, primarily loans, for cleanup activities in your service area, your target area, and then build a program at a more local level, we'll say. And then cleanup grants are primarily used for the remediation of sites. There can be some other planning and minimal assessment activities eligible under cleanup, but primarily with a cleanup grant, you are paying for the environmental remediation of your target site. And multi-purpose grants, you're applying for multiple sites, generally at least 2. Assessment grants, you're also applying for multiple sites, and Katie, I'll talk more about that, but those are generally community-wide, so involve multiple sites. Revolving loan funds are multiple sites, and then cleanup are usually single site applications, although it is possible to apply for multi-sites, mostly based on the scale and the funding caps. You see traditionally that that's an individual site application. Next slide. Who is eligible? All of the grants, state, local, and tribal governments are eligible. Other general purpose units of local government are eligible. Regional councils or regional or redevelopment agencies. In some states, these are called local development districts. Nonprofit organizations, as classified by the IRS. Primarily what we see are 501c3 organizations. There are some different types of nonprofit organizations that are eligible for certain kinds of EPA grants, but not others. So if you are a nonprofit organization that is not a 501c3 and you need help sort of parsing that out and figuring out what you're eligible, we can help with that as well. And then quasi-governmental agencies are also eligible. Things like redevelopment authorities that may be established by state or local governments, but function more independently and similarly to a nonprofit organization are also eligible. And Katie will tell us more about each of these grants.
Thanks, Carrie. The first grant we'll speak about is the multipurpose grant. As Carrie said, it is a bit of a more complex grant, but it does combine the assessment and cleanup piece. And so it is good for communities that have already identified one specific area with one or more brownfield sites. The activities can include developing your inventory list that we spoke about earlier in order to identify just how many sites you're actually looking at. Conducting your community engagement activities, that's an important piece to make sure you're bringing the community in, so that especially if this is going to be a larger area and it can really have an impact on, well, they all have an impact on your community, but if for some reason, again, it's clustered and that has the potential to really change the look of a community when it's all said and done, it just drives home the importance of the engagement piece. And also it is a requirement when it comes to cleanup grants. So that is incorporated into this piece. Conducting your environmental site assessments. Again, that's what your qualified environmental professional that you would choose would work on. Developing your cleanup plans and reuse plans that are related to the brownfield site. Again, it just allows all this to tie together, because then it involves the actual physical cleanup of the site, and then developing an overall plan for revitalization. So again, while this is a bit more complex, it is nice that so much is packaged together that, well, you have to do the packaging, but so much of it really can kind of flow together. Again, when you start at the beginning of the process, which is identifying the sites, assessing them, and then actually working on the plans to see, to prepare that vision to see what can be developed on this site or sites, and then ultimately going through the physical cleanup and preparing for the new plans that can spring up on that site. Sorry, my words are failing me, but that's going through that process is where you would determine, is this going to be a recreational site? Is it going to be a mixed use of commercial and residential? Next slide, please. The assessment grant. We've certainly touched on this a bit already, but this is good because generally they are community wide. So it's a good opportunity for someone to undertake when they want to get a handle on how much contamination they're actually looking at. We actually, before we became the TAB provider, and we still hold it, we have an assessment grant through the EPA. So it's been a good learning opportunity for me actually to understand what communities actually do and everything that's involved with it, including the software that we have to report to the EPA in. But it allows you to identify the project area where you're going to work, and you're going to, again, prepare that inventory, prioritize your sites, and then start to prepare that plan for assessing the sites. You can also use the grants for conducting site redevelopment planning. That's a great opportunity for an assessment grant. That is just really a nice feature to have, that again, you still have to make sure that the bulk of your grant is actually used for physical assessment of the site, but the planning piece is really great, that again, you do have that ability to start to work on the visioning for what this site or these sites could turn out to be, and conducting your community involvement in order to create that area-wide plan. Again, that's a great tool that can happen under the assessment grant. And then cleanup and redevelopment planning that's centered around your actual brownfield impacted area. So again, it's just really looking at the big picture to start to understand what you're going to need to undertake when it comes to cleanup, because you can go through the phase one, and phase one assessment, of course, is just largely the research, what we kind of call the desk work, trying to understand the history of the site. And then phase two is physically going onto the site to take those samples. If you do believe, based on the phase one, that there is a significant amount of contaminant that needs to be identified. And then also, again, you can work to prepare your area-wide plans. So I was thinking that there was something else I was going to say. Sorry about that, but yeah, sorry, I can't think. But anyway, if I think of it, I'll mention it later. So assessment grant. Great tool to apply for. Next slide, please. Assessment grants come in various types. You have community-wide, which again, I just mentioned. And I'm not going to go over that again, but it does allow you to really look at all the opportunities that are in your community. A coalition grant, that's a great opportunity. If maybe you are a smaller community, or you're a staff of 1 or 2 people, a lot of us have been in that situation before, and you don't have the capacity. You could work with someone else who would be your co-applicant, and they could take the lead. So someone who has more capacity or some experience, you could work on that together. That's a great opportunity. And then also there are state and tribal assessment grants. Next slide, please. The revolving loan fund grant. We always say, if you are in fact considering one of these, please contact us so that we can help you work through this. It's not one that we have a lot of experience in, and it's just not one of the most common grants that are applied for. But we do know, we know some great people who do actually have one, and so we are happy to always put you in touch with with those folks so that they can give you tips and tricks that they would have. And again, what it does is it establishes the loan fund that you are responsible for, that you are administering the loans and the subgrants to help carry out cleanup of brownfield sites. And when you set it up, it can be at no interest or low interest loans in order to help the communities to be able to fund sources of funding that they may not have otherwise. So again, if you do feel that you could take this on, I mean, you could be really doing a great service for smaller communities that just may not have the tools at their disposal. So it really is a great program. And again, you can also do it as an individual, or you can do it as a coalition, just as the assessment grant could be a coalition as well. And then typically the subgrants are limited to $500,000 per site. Next slide, please. Cleanup grants. Okay, so they provide funding generally for one site, but it can be for multiple sites. You do need to own the property. Carrie touched on that earlier with the all appropriate inquiry. So again, if you will be gearing up to apply for a cleanup grant, please be sure that you make sure you do not take ownership, no matter the shape or form of how you will be acquiring it, whether you're purchasing it or taking it for $1. Please make sure you go through the proper steps before you take ownership of that. Again, we say that many times, but it is that important. It also includes reporting, cleanup, oversight, and then the environmental monitoring that may need to happen as the result of what was found when you did the assessment. And then once you physically get on the site, again, the monitoring may need to happen for multiple years. Sampling activities and cleanup alternatives with your specific cost estimates are required. So when you have the opportunity to clean up a site, there are different options available to you, and that is what your consultants will help you determine. And you'll have the opportunity to determine, to make the decision about which one is the best, which one is going to fit within your budget, and which one makes sense for that site. And so again, what comes out of that report is, your consultant has prepared that report, and you can choose what that best option is and move forward from there. Next slide, please. Cleanup grants. Again, I think we've hit on some of this already. Timing of the ownership transfer is important. Again, that does need to happen within 180 days. It's very important that you are diligent about the timing of when that would take place before you apply for your cleanup grant or your multi-purpose grant. So definitely want to keep that in mind and time that when it comes to actually having your phase 1 or all appropriate inquiry done, and when you would plan on actually submitting your application. Public meeting is required to be held when it comes to your cleanup grant and your multi-purpose grant. So you want to keep that in mind, that that's something that you just need to prepare for. When you're giving a notice in your proper channels, whether that's a local newspaper or the means that you find most acceptable or that are required by your local code. You want to keep in mind that that needs to be done no later than 2 weeks before you actually submit the application. And of course, in that public notice, you're going to want to let the community know the purpose of the grant that you're applying for, and you want to let them know when the date and the time of the meeting will be. You do have the opportunity to hold the meeting on the date of another existing meeting. So if that's going to be a county commission meeting or a city council meeting, you can actually hold it at that time so that you don't need to double up if you have that opportunity. And then also in that notice, you're going to let the community know where they can review that draft an analysis of cleanup alternatives, or the ABCA. I think there's one more. Next slide, please. Job training grants. Again, these are not one of the more popular ones, or not popular, at least for what we have traditionally had the opportunity to work with. But again, it's always something we are happy to help you with. But you do have, if you apply for this grant, you have up to $500,000 for your nonprofit and organizations in order to recruit, train, and place predominantly low-income and minority unemployed and underemployed people who are living in areas that are affected by solid or hazardous waste. So the applicants have to have a partnership in place with a local employer, and in order to show how this service is going to work, the residents do need to learn the skills in order to help them maintain full-time employment, because it's all about trying to, again, revitalize a community or a certain neighborhood that may have taken a hit because of the loss of an industry. So that's why a job training grant could really be valuable like that. It is, our understanding is that it is, a good bit of a lift. There's a good bit of a heavy lifting involved, just in terms of, your goal is to really make sure you are facilitating improvement in the lives of those who are going through the job training grant, because your goal is to assist them. And so you mentor them along the way. So that's the purpose. Thank you.
All right, just quickly, one other program to be aware of that's funded by EPA Brownfield program are what are called state and tribal response programs. These are programs that fund states and tribes directly to help communities with economic development and environmental concerns related to brownfield sites. Each state and tribal program uses theirs slightly differently. A lot of times they support their voluntary cleanup remediation programs, which we didn't talk a lot about today, but stay tuned for a future webinar on that, I'm sure. It can be a good opportunity or a good option for folks to reach out to your state environmental agency, DEP or DEQ, to see how their program works and if there are other resources that might be available for support there. And that's also something that we can help connect you with. You'll sometimes hear these called 128A grants. That just has to do with the funding, the statute that funds it. But this is funding that flows through the states. So the states get it directly from EPA, and then they implement it based on their work plans. So that's just some other resources that are out there. Next slide. We talked earlier about different activities and different parts of the redevelopment process that are costly but not eligible for EPA funding. And oftentimes an EPA grant may require leverage or cost share or be more competitive if it includes that, even when it's not required. So some examples of other ways other sources of funding that you might use throughout the redevelopment process on a site or a larger brownfield effort are tax credits, the historic tax properties that are on the National Historic Register or in a historic district, low income housing. If you're building low income housing, there are tax credit opportunities, new markets tax credits. These three are all federal tax credits. And then there may be some state specific tax credits that either mirror these programs or have other purposes that can be helpful and can help make a brownfield property redevelopment more financially feasible. There's of course traditional lending and loans through a bank, or also often socially minded lenders, those who may have a more mission focus and are willing to take a lower return or give better interest rates because they're not only looking to profit financially from a loan, but also things like CFIs, traditional private investment, equity investors into a project. Banks also sometimes invest through their Community Reinvestment Act activities. And that's something that we can follow up with more information on if you are interested in that. And then there may be other federal programs that are providing funding to brownfields that just don't use the word brownfields. And so it's important to look at different opportunities based on what your needs are and what your intended reuse is. For example, you might want to go after a USDA community facilities grant if the reuse of your property is something like a new fire station or a new town hall. The Appalachian Regional Commission for the parts of your state that are in the Appalachian region may be willing to fund something or a program related to the site or the reuse. A lot of times communities, both entitlement and non-entitlement communities, have used community development block grant funding, which comes through the Housing and Urban Development Department to do things like blight removal. And so these are all things that overlap, but you may need to search not just the word brownfield and present it in a different way. Next slide. So just a quick case study. What does all this look like, right? We've talked a lot about all this funding, but how do projects actually do it? So we have a really great example in West Virginia, a very small town of Shepherdstown that turned a landfill into a library. The project started in 2011 or maybe a little bit before that with the need for a new library space in the county that Shepherdstown is located in. They have a very lovely, small, what's known as the Market House Library in their downtown, but it was very small and not nearly large enough to accommodate all of the residents they were intending to serve. It was not ADA compliant, so it wasn't accessible to all of their residents, and it did not have a lot of the technology upgrades or the ability to upgrade the technology to really be a more modern library. And so they started looking for a site, and they identified an old municipal landfill that was still owned by the city, and partnered with their development authority at the county to take ownership of the property and help prepare the site to become a library. And so the Jefferson County Development Authority ownership of the property from the city, town of Shepherdstown, I believe they're officially a town, and applied for a cleanup grant successfully, implemented that cleanup grant, went through the voluntary remediation program to ensure that it was cleaned up to the appropriate standards, and then transferred that property to the library. The library then had a very successful, though long campaign to raise more than $4.4 million to build their new library that would be more accessible. It's a much larger site, obviously a little teeny building on a main street versus an old landfill, you can imagine, and we'll have some photos in a moment. But they raised $4.4 million from a wide variety of donors, primarily individual donations. There were a couple of foundations that donated to them. Less than 1% of their funding came from public sources, and that included the EPA cleanup grant. INBAC is a program of WVU TAB sort of. So the Brownfield Center gave them a mini grant that really helped them get started, helped them start to vision and engage the community in the process. And it has been a huge success. They opened, next slide. I don't think I have a picture of the first library, but this is a picture. These are pictures from the landfill. So what you would expect, a big property with a bunch of trash in it. And so this was the before, not really doing anything for the community, not at all attractive. And then after all of that work that I talked about, all of the cleanup and capital campaign and working with architects and dealing with a pandemic, they were able to build this beautiful library on the next slide. That includes a ton of spaces being used for all kinds of community activities. They have a lot of outdoor space that they're able to use and accommodate lots more folks, lots more materials, And it's been a really huge success, and it's absolutely beautiful. So these are the things that you can do. And they did a lot of really creative stuff along the way. There's nobody more creative than a librarian. So they had lots of events, lots of great community engagement to figure out what the space needed to look like, and what was possible with the funding that they were able to raise. And it all started with the Brownfield conversation. So this is what you can do with all these resources that we've talked about today. Next slide.
Thanks, Carrie. I know we are up against the clock, actually a bit over. So this slide just gives you a sense of kind of your roadmap to be preparing for applying for a grant, if that's what you choose in the fall. So keep this in mind as you plan. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I know we're running long, but if anyone has any questions, you can drop them into the chat or ask them here, or certainly please contact us at any time afterwards. We're happy to have a call at any point.
Great. While we're waiting to see if there's any questions, Becca, do you want to run our second poll?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to launch this Zoom poll. First one, if you could rate your understanding of TAB program services. Second question is to rate your current understanding of EPA program services. And the third question is to rate your current capacity to pursue an EPA Brownfields grant. And again, this is a Zoom poll, so if you've got the latest version, it should just pop up. And if you could answer those questions, that would be great, because that's part of our grant requirements, our funding requirements. So I'll leave that running for a second. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, which is totally fine. I will turn things back over to Katie and Carrie.
Thanks, Becca. Can you advance a few slides, please? One more. Great. Thank you so much. These are just some of the ways that we can help you here at TAB. Again, it's brownfield education, resource identification, local brownfield program support, and project development and design assistance. We host webinars like this. We can provide assistance when it comes to preparing your grant application. We don't write them, but we're happy to provide review. We can help with your inventory preparation. And then also with our community engagement lab, we have the ability to help your community go through the visioning process and ultimately come up with a rendering that can take your vision and bring it to a great design. Next slide. Just want to let you know about some upcoming events. We will have a video that that Becca will let you know about all about your inventories, again, when it comes to what to expect and how to proceed. So look for some information about that. And then also certainly further down the horizon is going to be in the fall. We will host webinars to let you know about the new grant guidelines as they are released and as we have the opportunity to review them. But we do have new topics coming up all the time. We do have hot topics coming up, what we're calling webinars for particularly interesting topics that may be of interest to you. And we are doing 2 for public health. So the first is going to be kind of a general overview and information so you can understand how public health can, how that can be beneficial for your community and how you can apply your brownfield grant to actually improving community health. And then the second part of that is going to be involving drilling more into the actual data itself. So it's kind of the big picture of how community health is impacted by a brownfield site negatively and how you can use the data to help to strengthen your application for a brownfield grant. And then state conferences, just mark your calendar if you're interested or able in Virginia. we will be hosting the Danville Brownfield Conference in June, and then in September, the West Virginia Conference will be held. Both are great opportunities, and so if you have any session ideas, please let us know for the West Virginia session, and you can use the link there. And so we'll just wrap it up with the slide with our contact information. Again, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're always happy to meet with you, and we can start with a call, and if it's beneficial to travel to your community, we can do that as well. Thank you all for taking the time to join us.
Have a great day, and we'll be sending out the recording and slides as soon as they're available.